What if the most important road in history was an ocean? In 1492, the Atlantic stopped being the edge of the world and became a highway. And the reason wasn't a sudden burst of courage. It was incentives, trade, money, and power. By the end, you'll see one clean map logic. Routes change, costs change, power changes, and once the route flips west, the world doesn't reset. Before 1492, Europe's valuable goods, spices, silk, luxury items, rarely moved on a single clean line. They moved through chains, port to port, market to market, intermediary to intermediary. Every handoff added cost, every border added politics, and every choke point added risk, tariffs, blockades, bribes, delays. So the real problem wasn't sail farther. It was, how do we skip the chain? Here's the twist. 1492 isn't mainly an adventure story. It's a supply line story. When routes control profit, routes control power. That's the turning point mechanic behind empires. Now shift to Iberia. Portugal is already playing a long game, decades of incremental voyages down West Africa. Not one heroic leap, but repeat trips that add small corrections to the map. Each journey teaches winds, currents, safe harbors, and seasonal patterns. It's slow, methodical learning, and by the late 1400s, that knowledge starts to stack into an advantage others can't ignore. Shipbuilders improve hulls and sails. Navigators refine charts and instruments. When risky acts become repeatable, they stop being miracles. They become strategy, something a state can plan, fund, and scale. Spain is watching, because a new route isn't just money, it's leverage, prestige, and the ability to bypass middlemen and choke points. Spain doesn't want Portugal to win the route race alone. So Spain becomes ready for a different gamble. Sail west to reach the east. Columbus believes Asia is closer than it is. The math is wrong, dramatically wrong, but the promise is enormous. If he's right, Spain doesn't just join trade. Spain controls trade. That's why the pitch lands: direct access, lower costs, and power that doesn't depend on other people's gates and prices. Cut to the court. Coins on a table. A seal pressed into wax. A private dream becomes state policy. And once a crown funds a high-risk voyage, exploration stops being personal. It becomes geopolitics. In 1492, 3 ships push into the Atlantic. Then the world becomes water and sky. No GPS, no radio, just wind, estimates, and discipline. The tension lives in rope fibers and strained sailcloth. Weeks pass. Repairs never stop. Supplies are counted. Morale is managed. And fear grows quiet. The biggest threat isn't a storm. It's the possibility the ocean has no reward. What if it never ends? Then land appears. Caribbean islands. Green against pale dawn. Europe later called it discovery. But the reality is contact, with people already living there, with their own networks and worlds. So we tell it accurately, not an empty map filling up, but worlds colliding. And the real turning point happens right after. On the map, when a line forms across the Atlantic. This is the pivot. The Atlantic becomes a bridge. Once an ocean becomes a bridge, history accelerates. Voyages multiply. Maps expand. Blank spaces shrink. And the corridor turns permanent. Ports become machines, barrels, ledgers, schedules, repeat trips. And when a system scales, rivals show up. Because the prize is no longer one voyage. The prize is a reliable highway of wealth. Now the map splits into 2 competing strategies. Portugal pushes around Africa toward the Indian Ocean. Spain pushes across the Atlantic. 2 powers, 1 logic. Routes decide who wins. And when 2 powers compete, they try to write rules. At least rules that benefit them. That's why the next turning point isn't a ship, it's paperwork that tries to control oceans. In 1494, Spain and Portugal agree to the Treaty of Tordesillas, an imaginary line drawn across the Atlantic to divide spheres of influence. It's a wild idea. Claim the planet with geometry. On parchment, The line looks clean, like a ruler can separate futures. But reality pushes back. Coastlines aren't fully known. Distances aren't agreed, and other powers don't treat Iberian ink as law. So the race continues anyway. The map grows crowded, overlapping routes, competing claims, and rising tension. And now we reach the part most voyage stories skip, even though it changes everything. Because the consequences of 1492 aren't only political, they're biological and economic. Contact doesn't just move people and goods, it moves living things. And that reshapes life at scale. The Columbian Exchange begins, plants, animals, and pathogens crossing between hemispheres. New crops spread and reshape diets. New animals transform landscapes and labor. The world starts to merge, fast. In parts of the Old World, new foods support population growth. In the New World, animals and new practices alter ecosystems. But the most devastating transfer is disease, an invisible force with enormous impact. Indigenous communities with no immunity face catastrophic loss. We don't sensationalize it, but we don't erase it either. This is part of the turning point. Contact rewrites demography and power. Then the economic machine grows. Footholds become colonies. Extraction follows. Gold and silver flow into European hands and finance bigger ambitions. The Atlantic becomes a system, ports, cargo, repeat voyages, ledgers, schedules, and shipping lanes turn ocean space into infrastructure. And exploitation expands too. Forced labor systems and the growth of human trafficking across the Atlantic. When routes scale, outcomes scale. That's the hard truth behind the map logic. The same highway that carries wealth can carry violence and displacement. So now zoom out and watch what the map does next. Mediterranean trade doesn't vanish, but the globe begins to move west. The Atlantic rises because oceans scale, more cargo, lower cost per unit, fewer choke points, broader reach, and stronger state projection. Ports become power nodes, and whoever controls the lanes controls the flow. So remember 1492 in one sentence. A route change. Then costs change. Then power change. The Atlantic became a highway. Next episode, we follow the fight for control, treaties, capes, and the road to India, how exploration hardens into empire, and routes become borders. This is Timeline Stories. Fast, clear world history, one era at a time.